time bends, reality folds, logic breaks. In a universe ruled by contradiction, the closer you look, the less it makes sense, yet the more it reveals. This is a journey through the impossible, through paradoxes that shouldn't exist, but somehow do. Because somewhere between order and chaos, life and death, truth and illusion, lies the mystery of everything we are. Welcome to Paradoxes That Shouldn't Exist. The paradox of existence. Imagine sitting alone in a quiet room. The world outside is asleep. The air is still. Somewhere a clock ticks, and in that rhythm, you feel the strange pulse of existence itself. You are here. But why? How? The simplest fact, that you exist, turns out to be the most perplexing of all. Because when you look closer, the idea of existence begins to collapse under its own weight. To exist means to be. Yet, what does it mean to be? Philosophers, mystics, and scientists have all tried to pin down this elusive truth, and every attempt only deepens the paradox. If something exists, it must have come from somewhere. But if existence has a beginning, then there must have been a time when there was nothing. And if there was nothing, how could something ever come to be? Nothing, by definition, cannot produce anything. It has no potential, no cause, no energy, no time. And yet, here we are. Every star, every atom, every heartbeat, all rising out of the impossible. The paradox of existence begins when you try to imagine absolute nothingness. Not empty space, not blackness, not silence, but truly nothing. No observer, no concept, no point of reference. The mind resists it because the mind itself is something. Thought cannot grasp nothingness because thought depends on being. And so, every attempt to picture nothing creates something. The very act of imagining nothing destroys it. If nothingness cannot exist, then maybe existence never began. Perhaps there was never a moment of creation, never a leap from nothing to something. But that too is troubling. Because if existence had no beginning, it stretches infinitely backward, without origin or cause. And how can anything be infinite in the past and yet arrive at now? How can the endless ever reach this moment? We are caught in a loop between two impossibilities. Something cannot come from nothing, but existence cannot be infinite either. Both options defy reason, yet one of them must be true. Or perhaps both are false in a way our minds cannot comprehend. This is the first paradox that shouldn't exist. The paradox of being itself. The simple fact that you can read these words, breathe, think, and observe the world already contains an impossible truth. You are proof of something that cannot logically be. Science tries to offer answers. Quantum physics tells us that particles can flicker in and out of existence, that the vacuum is not truly empty. Maybe the universe was born from a quantum fluctuation, a ripple in a sea of potential energy. But that explanation only moves the question back one layer. If the quantum field existed before the universe, where did that field come from? What contains it? Why does it exist at all? Even the concept of causation begins to fall apart. Every cause must have a cause before it, leading to an infinite regress or a first cause that appeared uncaused, both of which are logically unstable. This is the paradox of the origin, a universe that cannot have begun and yet clearly did. Mystics often take another path. They say existence is not something that began. It simply is. It has no opposite, no boundary. Reality, they say, is timeless. But that is not a resolution. It is a surrender. The human mind wants explanations that can be measured, yet the very structure of logic may be too small to contain the nature of being. Think of it this way. If there was nothing, then there was no rule saying that nothing must remain nothing. But if that rule didn't exist, then perhaps something could emerge. That thought seems clever at first, but it collapses when you realize that a rule not existing is itself a kind of existence. We circle back into the same paradox. Existence cannot escape itself. And so, the universe might be the ultimate paradox. something that is not supposed to be, but is anyway. Now, consider yourself within this mystery. You are aware that you exist, yet you did not choose to exist. You simply appeared, like a dreamer waking inside a dream that has no beginning. This awareness feels solid, real, personal. But what is it built from? Matter, neurons, electrical patterns. Even those, if traced back far enough, dissolve into quantum uncertainty. Probabilities, not certainties. Reality itself seems to flicker between being and non-being. This shimmering instability may be the true essence of existence. A paradox that never resolves because its contradiction is what keeps it alive. When you close your eyes, try to feel that paradox. You are something that shouldn't be, held together by impossibility. Every breath is proof that reality bends logic to make room for itself. You live in the tension between nothing and everything, and somehow, that tension is what allows you to exist at all. The ancient philosopher Parmenides once declared that what is, and what is not. He meant to establish firm ground for being itself. But thousands of years later, we have learned that reality doesn't follow his rule. Things flicker, appear, vanish, and reappear. Light behaves like a wave and a particle. Objects can be in multiple states at once until observed. In the smallest layers of existence, certainty dissolves. If being were stable, the universe would be still. But it moves, vibrates, oscillates, forever balancing contradictions. It seems that paradox is not an error of thought. It may be the foundation of everything. Every paradox that follows in this exploration will build upon this one. Because before we can understand paradoxes of time, identity, space, or consciousness, we must confront the first and greatest contradiction, that anything exists at all. When you stare into the night sky and see the stars, remember that each one burns with the light of something that never should have been. The atoms that make up your body were forged in stellar cores billions of years ago. They were once plasma, before that energy, and before that, perhaps nothing at all. And yet they became you, the impossible, made personal. You, reading this, are the living face of the paradox of existence. The universe asking itself how it could possibly be here. It's easy to forget this mystery in daily life. We chase goals, fears, and desires, but beneath it all lies this trembling truth. Being is a miracle that logic cannot justify. It shouldn't be, and yet it is. That's what makes it so haunting, so beautiful. So tonight, when silence surrounds you and the air feels heavy with stillness, take a moment to sense the weight of this paradox. You are suspended between nothingness and infinity, between the impossible and the undeniable. And in that fragile balance, everything you know unfolds. The paradox of time. Time feels like the most natural thing in the world. It flows, moment after moment, like an invisible river carrying everything forward. We wake, move, age, and change beneath its current. Yet when we try to grasp what time actually is, it slips through our fingers like water. The more we look, the less there seems to be. Every experience we have takes place in time. Every heartbeat, every sunrise, every thought depends on it. But time is also the one thing we can never step outside of to examine. We live within it, confined by its one-way movement. And this movement is the first illusion, the first paradox. Because when you truly look, it isn't clear that time moves at all. Einstein shattered the old certainty when he showed that time is not a universal constant. It bends with gravity, stretches with motion, and changes depending on where you stand. Two clocks traveling at different speeds will disagree about what time it is. Even worse, there is no single now that all observers can share. The past and the future are woven differently for everyone. This leads to one of the strangest ideas in all of physics, the block universe. In this view, all of time exists at once. The past, present, and future are not flowing, but frozen. Every event that ever was or ever will be already exists. Like pages in a book, you can only read one way. The feeling of time flowing is not a feature of reality, but of consciousness moving through it. But if time doesn't flow, what is change? How does one moment become another? How can motion or cause exist at all? Without change, nothing happens. Without happening, time has no meaning. Yet physics treats time as just another dimension, one that doesn't move, doesn't tick, doesn't unfold. We feel time passing because our minds create a sequence, a sense of before and after. But that sense might be like a movie reel flickering so fast we mistake still frames for motion. Every moment exists, but we only ever perceive one at a time. And in that perception lies the illusion of flow. Think of a melody. Each note is distinct, but the mind connects them, turning isolated sounds into music. Without memory, the song would vanish into meaningless tones. Without expectation, the next note would never arrive. Time, as we experience it, may be the same. Memory and anticipation weaving a pattern from static existence. Philosophers like Augustine struggled with this centuries ago. What then is time, he asked. If no one asks me, I know. If I wish to explain it, I do not know. He realized that the present moment itself cannot be captured. It disappears the instant we try to define it. The past no longer exists, and the future has not yet come. So where does time actually reside? Maybe nowhere but in the mind. Yet if time is only mental, how can it govern the universe? How can stars burn, planets spin, and entropy rise? The paradox deepens with the question of beginnings. If time began with the universe, what came before? The Big Bang marks the birth of both matter and time itself, meaning the question before the Big Bang has no meaning. There was no before, but the mind cannot help but ask what triggered the first instant. A cause must precede an effect, and yet, at the start of time, there was no before to hold a cause. We find ourselves in a circle. Time depends on events, and events depend on time. Neither can exist without the other, yet one must have come first. Imagine pausing the universe, every atom frozen, every photon suspended. Would time still exist? Without motion, without change, would a second have meaning? Most physicists say no. Time is not a thing, but a measure of change. Without change, time stops. But change itself depends on time to happen. Each defines the other in a loop with no beginning. And still, the paradox grows sharper when we consider memory. The past feels gone, yet it continues to shape us. We carry it in our minds and in our bodies, encoded in neural pathways, written in scars, stored in the very matter of our cells. But if the past no longer exists, how can it reach into the present? If it does exist, then where is it? Maybe every moment remains, layered invisibly within the fabric of reality. Perhaps nothing ever truly vanishes. It simply moves out of reach. In quantum theory, information cannot be destroyed, only transformed. This hints that every instant may still exist somewhere in the tapestry of space-time, eternal and unchanging, like echoes frozen in glass. But then, what about the future? If the future already exists, if all of time is laid out like a map, then free will becomes an illusion. Every choice you think you make was already made, every path already drawn. The moment you decide to lift your hand or speak a word was fixed long before you experience the decision. You are simply traveling through a script written in advance. That idea feels unbearable. We resist it instinctively, clinging to the belief that we shape the flow of time by our actions. Yet relativity and logic whisper otherwise. The future may be as real as the past, and you are only discovering the parts of yourself that were always there. Still, the human heart rebels. We feel time rushing past us, carrying joy and loss alike. We mourn what's gone and hope for what's coming. These emotions are real, even if time's flow is not. Maybe the paradox of time exists because we are both inside and outside of it. Our bodies are temporal. We age, decay, and die. But our awareness touches something timeless, something that watches the river flow without being swept away. The observer within us may belong to a realm beyond time altogether, glimpsing eternity through the narrow keyhole of the present moment. When you slow down and watch a sunset, you feel this paradox. The sky shifts colors, the sun dips below the horizon, and you sense movement. Yet the stillness within you feels untouched by the passage. For a moment, you stand in two worlds, the one that changes and the one that does not. Maybe time is not an enemy to be escaped, nor a mystery to be solved, but a mirror. It shows us that impermanence and eternity coexist, that flow and stillness are one. The paradox of time shouldn't exist because it violates our every intuition. It says that what feels alive and moving might be frozen and eternal, that what seems linear might be circular, that the beginning and the end could be the same point seen from different directions. And yet, without this paradox, life would lose its meaning. Because the illusion of time gives birth to growth, memory, and change. The very qualities that make consciousness rich. We may be eternal beings dreaming of time, but the dream itself is what lets us live. When you next feel the clock ticking, when a year ends or a birthday arrives, remember this strange truth. You are not moving through time. Time is moving through you. Every instant, every breath, is eternity pretending to be brief. The paradox of identity. You have a name, a face, a history. You think of yourself as a single continuous person, the same you who existed yesterday, last year, or 10 years ago. You can recall the child you once were, the mistakes you made, the moments that shaped you. And yet, beneath that comforting sense of continuity lies one of the deepest paradoxes of all. The self that you believe in might not actually exist. From the moment we are born, the mind begins constructing a story, a narrative that gives coherence to experience. It connects memories, emotions, and sensations into something that feels like me. But this sense of self, however vivid, may be no more real than the image reflected in a mirror. It changes with every passing second, even though we insist it remains the same. Look closely. The body you call yours has replaced almost every cell since your childhood. The atoms that compose you are borrowed from the air, the water, the food you eat, flowing in and out like a tide. You are not made of the same matter you were last year, and yet you claim to be the same person. The brain, too, changes constantly. Neurons form and die. Connections strengthen or fade. Memories distort and rewrite themselves. Each night you sleep, the mind reorganizes its structure, pruning and rebuilding pathways. You awaken subtly altered, a slightly different version of yourself, unaware that the continuity you feel is stitched together from fragments. So what, then, is identity? A pattern? A memory? A consciousness? Or is it simply a convenient illusion? If you lose a memory, are you still you? If you gain one falsely, a memory that never happened, does it become part of who you are? What if every memory you hold could be rewritten by some unseen hand? Would you change, or only your perception of who you are? The philosopher David Hume searched for the self within his own mind and found nothing but a collection of perceptions. "I never catch myself at any time without a perception," he wrote, "and never can observe anything but the perception." In other words, the self cannot be found, only experiences that arise and fade, one after another. Buddhist philosophy goes even further. It teaches that the self is an illusion, a process, not a thing. What we call I is just the interplay of thoughts, sensations, and consciousness. Like a flame that appears continuous, but is never the same from one moment to the next, we are constantly being renewed. Yet the illusion is powerful. It feels real because it must. Without the sense of self, the world would dissolve into chaos. The mind needs a center of gravity to navigate experience. The paradox is that the self must exist and not exist at the same time. Real enough to function, unreal enough to be free. Consider a river. At a glance, it seems to be a single, continuous entity. We name it, map it, speak of its flow. But look closely, and you find no fixed substance, only water passing through, endlessly changing. The river is not the same from one moment to the next, and yet we call it by one name. Identity works the same way. The you that wakes each morning is not the same you who went to sleep, but the story continues without interruption. This paradox becomes haunting when we think about memory loss. Imagine a person who loses all recollection of their past. Their body remains, their voice the same, but their inner world is erased. Are they still themselves? What if their memories were replaced with another's? Would their identity follow? Now take the opposite extreme. A perfect copy of you, down to every atom and memory. If that copy were created right now, would it be you? It would think the same thoughts, feel the same emotions, and claim the same history. But if both of you stood side by side, which would be the real one? The paradox of identity lies in this exact moment. Two beings sharing one past but diverging into separate futures. This isn't mere thought experiment. Quantum mechanics and neuroscience whisper similar puzzles. Some interpretations of consciousness suggest that every decision branches reality into multiple versions. In one, you turn left. In another, right. Each version of you continues believing it's the only one. If that's true, then identity becomes fluid, scattered across infinite timelines, each unaware of the others. The ship of Theseus captures this perfectly. If you replace a ship's planks one by one until none of the original pieces remain, is it still the same ship? And if you reassemble the old planks into another ship, which one is the real Theseus? Replace the ship with yourself, your memories, your body, your thoughts. And the question becomes deeply personal. In daily life, this paradox hides beneath routine. We feel stable because change happens slowly. But if you were to compress your life into a few minutes of film, you would see constant transformation. Faces aging, habits shifting, beliefs evolving. You would not recognize yourself from beginning to end. The illusion of continuity is created by the smoothness of the story, not the permanence of the character. Yet, strangely, this instability is what allows growth. The fact that you are not fixed means you can learn, heal, and transform. The self is paradoxical not because it is false, but because it is both real and unreal, a story that tells itself into being. Some philosophers argue that consciousness is the only real constant. Beneath all change, there is awareness, not a person, but the capacity to experience. It does not have a name, a form, or a boundary. It watches thoughts and feelings rise and fall without being them. This awareness may be the true self, the one that never began and never ends. If so, then the paradox of identity dissolves into something even deeper. The realization that who you are is not your story, not your name, not your history. You are the space in which all those things appear and disappear. You are both the dreamer and the dream. And yet, from this formless awareness, a personality still emerges. You still say I, still feel love, loss, and longing. The illusion doesn't vanish, it simply becomes transparent. You begin to see through it, like sunlight passing through glass. Maybe the self isn't meant to be solved. Maybe it's meant to be lived. A paradox we inhabit, not resolve. Because without a self, there is no experience. And without the illusion of identity, consciousness would have nothing to explore. In the quiet hours of the night, when memories blur and you feel like a stranger to your own reflection, remember this paradox. You are the story and the storyteller, the actor and the witness. You are every version you've ever been, and none of them at all. And that, perhaps, is the ultimate truth hidden within the paradox of identity. That the one searching for who you are is the same one you are searching for. The paradox of consciousness. Close your eyes for a moment and notice the simple fact that you are aware. Behind every sound, thought, or feeling, there is a quiet presence observing it all. You may not be able to describe it, measure it, or point to it, yet it is the most intimate thing you know. It is you. And it is this mysterious awareness that gives rise to one of the greatest paradoxes of all: consciousness. We know that the brain is made of atoms, molecules, and electrical impulses. We can scan it, map it, and study how different areas light up when we think, dream, or feel emotion. But none of this explains how the cold firing of neurons becomes the warmth of experience, how physical matter produces subjective awareness, the feeling of being alive inside your own mind. This is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. We can trace every chemical reaction in the brain, but that doesn't tell us why it feels like something to be you. Why should neurons give rise to colors, tastes, and emotions? Why should electricity in the brain feel like love, fear, or the color red? From a purely physical standpoint, there's no reason it should. And yet, it does. The paradox lies in the fact that consciousness is both undeniable and inexplicable. We can doubt everything else, the external world, even our own memories, but not awareness itself. You can't question the fact that you are conscious, because even doubt requires consciousness to exist. Awareness is the foundation of all experience, and yet it refuses to be reduced to anything else. Some scientists believe consciousness emerges when matter reaches a certain level of complexity, like the way wetness arises from molecules of H2O. But wetness is a physical property. Awareness is not. You can touch water, but you cannot touch the feeling of being. Others propose that consciousness might be a fundamental property of the universe, like space, time, or gravity. Something that doesn't emerge, but simply is. If that's true, then consciousness existed before brains, before life, perhaps before the universe took form. Matter would not create mind. Mind would create the experience of matter. Reality itself would be, in essence, a vast field of awareness experiencing itself in countless forms. But here the paradox grows deeper. If everything is consciousness, why do we experience separation? Why do I see you as other and the world as out there? Why should a single universal awareness fracture itself into billions of perspectives that forget they are one? It's as if consciousness hides from itself to play the game of existence, dreaming of multiplicity within unity. In this view, every being is like a wave on the same ocean of awareness, appearing distinct but made of the same essence. When the wave crashes, the water returns to itself. Still, this idea feels abstract. The paradox of consciousness is not just philosophical, it's personal. Because even though you know your body is made of matter, your inner world feels non-material. You can't locate thoughts in space. You can't measure the taste of a memory. You can't weigh a dream. Consciousness has no shape, no edge, no color, and yet it defines everything you know. When you look at a flower, you think you see it out there in space. But in truth, the color, the scent, the beauty, all of that is happening inside consciousness. The flower as you perceive it exists in your mind, translated through electrical signals and interpreted by awareness. You never experience the external world directly. You experience a model of it, painted within consciousness itself. This means that what you call reality might be nothing more than consciousness experiencing its own imagination. The paradox deepens. If everything you know is within awareness, then you can never step outside of it to confirm whether anything exists beyond it. Reality could be a dream so consistent and shared that we mistake it for solid truth. The philosopher René Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am." But perhaps the truer statement is, "I am aware, therefore I am." Because thinking can stop, but awareness remains. It is the silent background behind every thought, the open sky behind every cloud of emotion. And yet, this awareness has no identity. You cannot say where it begins or ends. It doesn't age. It doesn't have a shape. It cannot be owned or lost. You can't even say it's yours, because it's the same awareness through which all beings perceive. The paradox is that consciousness feels deeply personal, and yet it may be universal. When you dream, the mind creates entire worlds, landscapes, people, emotions, all experienced as real until you wake. But who created them? The same consciousness that is now awake. The dreamer and the dream are not two separate things. Likewise, waking life may be another layer of the same dream. A cosmic consciousness imagining itself as you, living through you, learning from your experiences. Science resists this idea because it cannot measure the immeasurable. Consciousness doesn't fit inside the equations of physics. But perhaps the problem lies not in consciousness being too small to measure, but too vast to contain. Maybe it is not a phenomenon within the universe, but the very stage on which the universe appears. Imagine a mirror that can reflect everything but itself. You can see the reflections clearly, but never the mirror's own surface. Awareness works like that. You can know thoughts, feelings, and sensations, but you can never turn around and grasp the knower itself. The one who sees cannot be seen. Some traditions describe enlightenment as the moment the mirror recognizes itself, not as a reflection, but as the source of all reflections. When awareness awakens to its own nature, the paradox dissolves. The seeker realizes there was never anything to seek. The observer and the observed were one all along. Still, even that realization is part of the paradox, because the moment you try to describe it, you lose it. Words can only point toward consciousness, never capture it. You cannot fit the infinite into language. Perhaps that's why silence has always been sacred. In silence, the mind stops chasing definitions. The thinker fades, and awareness stands alone. Vast, clear, infinite. It is here that the paradox begins to make sense without needing to be solved. Consciousness shouldn't exist because it defies the laws of matter. It shouldn't have form, and yet it gives form to everything. It shouldn't know itself, yet it does. It is the mystery that makes all other mysteries possible. Every paradox so far, existence, time, identity, flows into this one. Because without consciousness, there would be no question, no wonder, no perception of paradox at all. It is both the stage and the spotlight, the dream and the dreamer, the nothing that contains everything. When you sit quietly and feel the simple fact of being aware, remember that this awareness is the most impossible thing of all. It has no cause, no shape, no limit, and yet it is the only thing you can never lose. Everything else changes, your body, your thoughts, your world. But awareness remains, watching, eternal, unbroken. The paradox of consciousness shouldn't exist. And yet, it does. It watches through your eyes even now, wondering about itself, trying to understand the mystery of its own reflection. The paradox of causality. Every event seems to have a cause. Every effect appears to arise from something before it. A spark ignites a flame. A thought triggers a choice. A seed becomes a tree. Causality is the chain that holds the universe together, the invisible thread that weaves one moment into the next. Without it, we believe, there would be only chaos. And yet, when we look deeply into this principle that seems so absolute, we find cracks in its foundation. Because if every event has a cause, then what caused the first one? And if the chain stretches infinitely backward, when did it ever begin? This is the paradox of causality, the puzzle of how anything can start at all. At first glance, causation feels simple. Strike a match, and a flame appears. But the flame doesn't come from nowhere. It arises from friction, heat, and oxygen. Each of those, in turn, has its own cause. Follow the line far enough back, and you reach the origin of the universe, the Big Bang. But what caused that? Science can describe how the universe expanded, but not why it happened in the first place. Some say it doesn't need a cause, that the universe simply exists as a brute fact, uncaused and eternal. But our minds resist this. Everything we experience has a reason. Nothing just happens. To say the universe began without a cause feels like saying something came from nothing, and that violates our most basic intuition. So perhaps the cause existed outside time, beyond the chain of before and after. But if it's outside time, it can't act within time. It can't start anything, because starting is itself a temporal idea. To cause something, there must be a moment before and a moment after. If time did not exist, there could be no cause at all. We find ourselves trapped in a loop. Every cause needs another before it, but an infinite chain of causes is impossible. Something must have been the first. But a first cause cannot exist without time. So causality seems both necessary and impossible at once. Philosophers have wrestled with this for centuries. Aristotle called the origin of motion the unmoved mover, something that caused everything else but was itself uncaused. Religious traditions named it God. But even that answer raises another question. Why does the unmoved mover exist? If it exists necessarily, then existence itself must be its nature. But if existence is its nature, then perhaps everything that exists shares that same nature. Maybe the universe doesn't need a cause because being itself is the cause. But what does that even mean? How can existence explain itself? In the quantum world, the paradox deepens. Particles can appear and disappear spontaneously, seemingly without cause. Virtual particles emerge from the quantum vacuum, live for a moment, and vanish. Scientists say this doesn't violate causality because it happens within a framework of quantum laws. But that only shifts the question. Where did those laws come from? Causality may not be as rigid as we think. On a quantum level, it may be statistical, not absolute. Events can occur without definite causes, only probabilities. A particle doesn't have a determined path until it is observed. The cause of its behavior might be the act of observation itself, but then the observer, too, must have a cause. The loop tightens again. Some physicists even suggest that causality might run both ways, that effects can influence causes. In certain interpretations of quantum mechanics, future events can alter the past, as if time itself adjusts to maintain consistency. If that's true, the universe may not move forward from cause to effect, but exist as a self-consistent whole, where everything fits together outside of linear order. In that sense, the universe may not be a chain of dominoes falling one after another, but a vast tapestry where every thread depends on the others simultaneously. There is no first thread, no final one, only a pattern that holds itself together by its own design. This view turns causality inside out. Instead of one thing causing another, perhaps everything causes everything. The universe sustains itself in a single timeless act of interdependence, like a web where every strand supports the rest. Mystics and philosophers have hinted at this for ages. They say that cause and effect are illusions born from limited perception. To the human mind, events seem separate. To the universe, they are one motion. The raindrop and the ocean are not two things. The drop is just the ocean in a smaller form. The cause and the effect are part of one undivided process. And yet, in our daily lives, causality feels real. We rely on it to survive. We make choices expecting outcomes. We plan, predict, and control. To question cause and effect seems absurd when we depend on it constantly, but perhaps both are true. Causality exists within experience, but not beyond it. Like the rules of a dream, it holds inside the dream but dissolves upon waking. The paradox of causality shouldn't exist, and yet it underlies everything. Without it, there would be no logic, no science, no sequence. But with it, we cannot explain the ultimate origin of anything. Even the smallest decision you make reflects this tension. Why did you choose one path over another? You might say it was your will, your desire, your reason. But what caused that desire? What shaped your reason? Every answer points backward to another until the trail vanishes into mystery. Maybe free will itself is another layer of this paradox. The illusion that you are the cause when, in truth, you are the result. Or perhaps the universe expresses itself through you, choosing in a way that transcends cause and effect altogether. In the end, the paradox of causality might be unsolvable because it is not a flaw in our reasoning. It is the foundation of reasoning itself. Logic depends on cause and effect. To step outside of it would be like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. Still, there's something beautiful about the mystery. To know that every event, from a star's birth to a falling leaf, is part of an unbroken circle of creation and destruction. That the universe moves without needing a beginning or an end. Perhaps causality is not a chain, but a wheel, turning forever, without origin, without final cause. The universe exists not because something started it, but because existence itself is the motion of the wheel. And in the quiet space between causes, between one thought and the next, there is something still, something uncaused. It is the same awareness we spoke of before, the observer beyond time and reason, the witness of the wheel. The paradox of causality shouldn't exist, yet it does, holding together a universe that cannot explain itself and a mind forever reaching for the reason why. The paradox of reality. You wake each morning believing the world around you is real. The bed beneath you feels solid. The air carries the scent of morning. You can hear the sound of life beyond the walls. Cars, voices, the hum of existence. Yet when philosophers, scientists, and mystics peer deeply into this world that feels so concrete, they all run into the same unsettling question. What if reality itself is an illusion? The paradox of reality begins with perception. Everything you experience, sight, sound, touch, taste, thought, arrives filtered through your senses. You do not see the world directly. You see an interpretation of it. Light hits your eyes and becomes electrical signals. Sound waves touch your ears and turn into nerve impulses. Your brain receives these signals and constructs a picture of reality. That picture is convincing, but it's not the thing itself. In other words, you never encounter the world as it truly is. You encounter a model of it, generated inside your mind. The color of the sky, the warmth of the sun, the taste of water. None of these exist out there. They exist only as experiences within consciousness. Neuroscience supports this strange truth. The brain creates reality like an artist painting from memory. It takes limited information and fills in the rest with expectations. You don't see the world as it is. You see what your brain predicts it to be. And most of the time, the prediction is so accurate that you never notice the illusion. But sometimes, the mask slips. In dreams, everything feels real until you wake. In hallucinations, the mind creates worlds that can't be found outside. Even in waking life, optical illusions reveal how easily perception bends. A straight line can look curved. A color can shift with context. A sound can change meaning depending on what you expect to hear. If perception can be fooled so easily, how can we ever know what's real? Philosophers like Immanuel Kant argued that there's a fundamental gap between the thing in itself and the thing as experienced. We can never know the world directly, only how it appears to us through the lenses of mind and sense. Reality may be infinite and unknowable, while our perception is a small window shaped by biology and belief. Now imagine this. What if that gap isn't just a limitation, but the entire design? What if reality depends on perception to exist at all? Quantum physics hints at this possibility. On a microscopic scale, particles do not have definite positions or states until they are observed. The act of observation determines their behavior. In other words, the observer and the observed are entangled. The universe does not exist in a fixed state, waiting to be seen. It becomes as it is seen. This idea, that consciousness might give shape to reality, is both thrilling and terrifying. It suggests that reality may not be objective in the way we imagine. It may be participatory. The observer helps create what is observed. But if that's true, then what happens when no one is looking? Does the universe still exist? Does the tree fall in the forest if there's no ear to hear it? Does reality need awareness to be real? Here lies the paradox. Reality appears independent, yet depends on perception. It feels solid, yet dissolves into probabilities at its core. Matter, once thought to be the foundation of existence, turns out to be mostly empty space. Fields of potential waiting to be defined. Consider this. The chair you sit on is not solid. Its atoms are mostly void, with particles so small and far apart they might as well be illusions of energy. And those particles themselves are not solid objects either. They are waves of probability, existing in multiple states until measured. Solidity is an appearance, not a fact. So what is reality made of? Matter, energy, information, or something even more elusive? Consciousness itself. Some physicists and philosophers believe the universe is fundamentally informational. A vast computational process. Reality, in this view, is like a cosmic simulation governed by mathematical rules. The particles, fields, and forces we see are data points rendered by the processing power of the cosmos. If true, that would mean reality is more like a dream than a machine. But if it's a simulation, who or what is running it? Is there a programmer, a mind behind the code? Or is consciousness itself the system, endlessly generating its own experience? This brings us to the heart of the paradox. The distinction between reality and illusion collapses, because if the experience feels real, then it is real in at least one dimension, the dimension of awareness. Your dream last night was not real in the physical sense, but it was real as experience. You felt it, you lived it, you remember it. It had texture, emotion, and consequence. What if waking life is simply a more stable version of the same process? A collective dream shared by billions of conscious minds, woven together by laws of physics we have agreed upon. The Hindu philosophy of Advaita Vedanta calls this Maya, the grand illusion. It doesn't mean that nothing exists, but that what we take as ultimate reality is merely a projection, a shadow of a deeper truth. Beneath the illusion of separateness lies one infinite consciousness, dreaming itself as stars, oceans, and people. In that view, waking up is not the end of the dream, but the recognition that you are both the dream and the dreamer. The paradox of reality becomes a revelation. Nothing is truly solid, but everything is profoundly connected. Even science, despite its material foundation, edges closer to mystery. When physicists look deeper into matter, they find not things, but relationships, interactions, probabilities, symmetries. The universe behaves like a network of information exchanging with itself. The more we study it, the less it looks like an object, and the more it resembles thought. Yet paradoxically, this realization does not make life less real. It makes it more wondrous, because even if reality is a dream, it is a dream of staggering beauty, a dream that can love, suffer, and create. You might think, if reality is illusion, why does pain feel real? Why does loss hurt? The answer is simple yet profound. Because illusion or not, experience is real to the experiencer. Whether the stage is physical or mental, the play still moves us. The tears still fall. The joy still burns bright. Perhaps the paradox is not that reality might be an illusion, but that illusion itself can be so convincing, so immersive, that it gives rise to genuine emotion and meaning. The dream feels real because it is meant to. That is the miracle of consciousness. To believe its own creation, to live inside its own imagination. In the end, the paradox of reality shouldn't exist. Something cannot be both real and unreal, both dependent and independent, both mind and matter. And yet, it is. The world continues to shimmer between these opposites, refusing to settle. When you gaze at the stars, you are looking into the past, at light that has traveled for billions of years to meet your eyes. You are seeing ghosts of suns long dead, yet they shine in your present moment. That is the nature of reality, both gone and here, both illusion and truth. So perhaps the answer is not to choose between real and unreal, but to see that they are two sides of the same mystery. The universe dreams itself through your perception, and in return, you awaken within it. Reality should not exist the way it does, but it does anyway. Defying logic, transcending definition and whispering to every conscious being, "You are the dreamer and the dream." The paradox of infinity. Infinity. The word itself feels endless, like a tunnel that stretches forever into the dark, where no final light can ever be reached. It is a concept so vast, so incomprehensible, that even thinking about it makes the mind tremble. And yet, infinity is not just an abstract idea. It is embedded in everything. Space, time, numbers, even your thoughts, all carry within them the whisper of the infinite. But infinity should not exist. It breaks the logic that gives meaning to limits. How can something have no end, no boundary, no measure? How can we speak of totality when there is no total to grasp? Still, when we try to deny infinity, it reappears, inevitable, haunting, and impossible to remove. Mathematicians meet it first in numbers. You can count forever, always adding one more. No matter how high you go, there is never a final number. Infinity is not a number. It is the absence of an ending. It cannot be contained or compared. But here lies the paradox. Infinity behaves as if it was something, even though it is not. We can calculate with it, reason about it, and yet it refuses to be complete. The ancient Greeks struggled with this idea. Zeno of Elea crafted his famous paradoxes to show how infinity leads to absurdity. In one of them, Achilles races a tortoise. The tortoise gets a small head start. Achilles runs faster, but by the time he reaches the tortoise's starting point, the tortoise has moved slightly ahead. Every time Achilles closes the gap, there's still a smaller distance left. If space can be divided infinitely, he argued, Achilles can never overtake the tortoise, because there will always be another fraction to cross. We know Achilles does overtake the tortoise in real life, but the math of infinity refuses to make it simple. Dividing something forever without reaching an end defies sense. How can infinite steps fit inside a finite distance? Infinity hides inside every process. Every moment in time can be divided endlessly. Between 1 second and the next lie infinite smaller intervals. Halves, quarters, thousandths, each more unreachable than the last. Yet somehow time flows. We move from past to future as if the infinite ladder of moments did not exist. How can we cross an infinite bridge in finite time? This is the paradox of motion. The world appears continuous, yet built from infinite divisions. The universe moves smoothly, but within that smoothness lies endless detail. Every heartbeat, every breath, every blink, composed of infinite fractions that somehow finish. Mathematics found ways to work with infinity. Calculus, for example, was built upon the idea of approaching a limit that is never reached. You can approach zero forever, getting infinitely close without ever arriving. This made the modern world possible. Bridges, computers, physics, all rely on these equations. And yet, beneath the precision lies the same impossibility. How can we manipulate what can never be completed? Then there's the paradox of infinite size. Look up at the night sky. The universe stretches beyond comprehension. Scientists say it may be infinite, or at least so vast that it might as well be. But infinity poses a problem. If the universe were truly infinite, every possible arrangement of matter would repeat somewhere. There would be another Earth, another you, reading these very words an infinite number of times. That idea feels both profound and unbearable. If everything repeats endlessly, then novelty becomes illusion. Every thought, every life, every tragedy has happened an infinite number of times before. Yet you feel this moment as unique, singular, precious. How can both be true? Infinity is not only vastness, it is also smallness. The infinite hides inside the finite. Within a single grain of sand lies an unending landscape of atoms, particles, and quantum fields. Each particle may contain deeper layers, each division leading to more depth. If you could zoom forever inward, would there ever be a bottom? Or would the universe fold endlessly upon itself, infinite both outward and inward. Infinity defies boundaries. It mocks the very idea of containment. You can never hold it, never point to it, never finish it. And yet, your mind can imagine it. That too is a paradox. The finite brain conceives the infinite. A creature of limited time and space can look beyond all time and space and think, there is no end. This ability to grasp what cannot be grasped might be humanity's strangest gift. It is what drives science, art, and philosophy. The urge to reach past the horizon, even knowing there is no final destination. Infinity calls us forward, but never lets us arrive. Some thinkers believe infinity exists only in the mind, a concept without counterpart in reality. The universe, they say, must be finite in some way, bounded, measurable, closed. Otherwise, paradoxes would tear logic apart. But others argue that infinity is not an invention of thought. It is the very fabric of existence. The infinite gives birth to the finite, just as the ocean gives birth to waves. In mysticism, infinity is not a problem, but a revelation. It is the divine made visible, the proof that reality transcends form. To glimpse infinity, even for a moment, is to feel the boundary of the self dissolve into something endless. Time stops. Space disappears. There is only the infinite presence of being, vast and silent. And yet, you cannot stay there. The human mind cannot live inside infinity. It must return to limits, to tasks, to clocks, to names. The paradox is that we are infinite beings living finite lives. Within each of us burns a longing for the endless, even as we inhabit the temporary. Think of how we measure time. We divide eternity into hours and days. We chop infinity into manageable pieces so we can live inside it. But the infinite remains just beneath the surface. You feel it in awe, in love, in grief. The vastness behind every emotion that reminds you of something larger than life. Infinity should not exist because it destroys definition. A thing without limits cannot be compared, cannot be known. But perhaps the infinite is not meant to be known. Perhaps it is meant to be felt. When you stand before the ocean, watch the horizon fade into the distance and sense the sky curve endlessly above you. That feeling, quiet, wordless, humbling, is your encounter with the infinite. The paradox becomes peace. You don't need to solve it. You only need to stand within it. Infinity may never be understood, but it is always here, woven into every moment, every number, every breath. The endless contained within the brief, the eternal hiding inside the now. And perhaps the greatest paradox of all is this: infinity, which cannot end, somehow gives rise to a world that begins and ends every second. The infinite dreaming of the finite, and the finite forever reaching back toward the infinite. The paradox of free will. You believe you make choices. You decide what to eat, where to go, who to love, when to speak, and when to remain silent. You move through life with the sense that your actions come from within, that you are the author of your own story. Yet beneath this feeling of autonomy lies one of the oldest and most haunting contradictions in human thought. If the universe follows laws of cause and effect, then every decision you make may have been determined long before you were born. The paradox of free will asks a simple but devastating question. If everything has a cause, how can you be free? Every thought, emotion, and impulse arises from your brain, a web of neurons firing in patterns shaped by genes, memories, and experiences. Those neurons obey the laws of physics, just like planets and atoms. If the universe unfolds according to those laws, then your next decision is already encoded in the state of your brain and the world around you. You feel like you're choosing, but you're simply following the script written by physics itself. This is the paradox: freedom within determinism. You experience yourself as an agent, yet your agency may be an illusion. Neuroscientists have tried to test this directly. In experiments, they've monitored brain activity while people make simple decisions, like pressing a button or choosing between two images. What they found is unsettling. The brain shows signs of having made a choice seconds before the person becomes consciously aware of deciding. The decision appears in the neural circuitry first. The conscious mind only discovers it afterward and claims ownership. It's as though consciousness is not the commander, but the narrator. Watching what the brain does, then telling itself a story. I chose that. If that's true, then free will might be a trick of perspective, a necessary illusion that helps us navigate life. Without it, responsibility would vanish. Morality, justice, even meaning would dissolve. We would become machines pretending to choose. But perhaps the problem is not as simple as determinism versus freedom. Maybe both coexist, in ways our linear thinking cannot grasp. Consider the possibility that you are both free and determined, depending on where you look. From the outside, your actions follow cause and effect. From the inside, you feel intention, choice, and awareness. Both views are valid within their own frame. Just as light behaves as both particle and wave, human will might be both free and bound. Two sides of the same mystery. The philosopher Spinoza saw freedom not as independence from cause, but as understanding the cause. He believed that true freedom comes when we realize why we act, when we see the chain of influences clearly enough that we are no longer dragged by them unconsciously. The more self-aware we become, the freer we feel. In this view, freedom isn't the absence of law, it's harmony with it. You are free when your actions flow naturally from your understanding of who you are, not from blind impulse. The universe may be determined, but consciousness allows you to see the pattern and participate in it with awareness. Still, even that explanation leaves something mysterious. Because self-awareness itself, this capacity to step back and observe, feels like something outside the causal chain. How can an effect observe its own cause? How can the mind look at its own programming? Awareness seems to stand apart from what it observes, untouched by the mechanisms it watches. Maybe that's where true freedom hides. Not in control, but in observation. You may not choose your thoughts, but you can notice them. You may not control every event, but you can be conscious of how you respond. Awareness itself might be the purest form of free will, the space in which choice appears, even if the content of that choice is conditioned. Imagine you are standing in a river. The current represents the flow of causality, the endless chain of events that shape everything. You cannot stop the river, but you can swim with it, against it, or simply float and observe. Your position in the current may be determined, but how you move within it. That subtle shift of awareness may be the freedom you actually have. Then again, perhaps even that feeling of awareness is part of the flow. The paradox remains. If every cause has an effect, and every effect becomes another cause, where could freedom possibly exist? Quantum mechanics muddies the waters further. On the smallest scales, events are not entirely predictable. There is randomness, uncertainty at the heart of reality. Some have argued that free will might arise from this indeterminacy, that our choices are not fixed, but probabilistic. But randomness is not freedom either. A random event is no more chosen than a determined one. Chaos is not autonomy. So if the universe is not fully determined and not purely random, what remains? Perhaps free will exists in the balance between the two, in the conscious shaping of possibility. You do not control the entire script, but you may improvise within it. You cannot change the laws of gravity, but you can decide how to move under them. You cannot erase your past, but you can choose how to interpret it. That is the delicate paradox of freedom. You are bound by structure, yet you move freely within it. Like a dancer within rhythm, your liberty comes not from escaping the beat, but from embodying it. And yet, the paradox deepens when we ask what you truly is. If the self is an illusion, a constantly changing process as we explored earlier, then who exactly is free? The self that makes a choice today is not the same self who will bear its consequences tomorrow. Freedom may belong not to the person, but to the consciousness that witnesses all versions of the person. the timeless awareness beneath the changing story. In that sense, perhaps freedom is not something we gain or lose. It is what we are. Awareness itself is unbound. It does not act or react, it simply observes. It is free not because it controls events, but because it transcends them. Still, the feeling of agency remains powerful. Even if science one day proves that every decision is predetermined, humans will continue to feel free. The illusion of choice might be built into consciousness because it gives life its meaning. Without the belief in freedom, love would lose sincerity, art would lose inspiration, and effort would lose purpose. Maybe the universe needs this illusion to experience itself as dynamic. Maybe determinism is the rule, and free will is the illusion that makes the rule interesting. Or maybe it's the other way around. Free will is real, and determinism is the illusion that gives it contrast. The paradox of free will shouldn't exist. Logic demands one answer or the other. Either we are free or we are not. But life insists on both. Every moment feels both destined and open. Every action feels both chosen and inevitable. You are both the player and the game, the actor and the script. You follow the path laid out before you, and yet each step is your own. Perhaps that's what freedom truly means. Not escaping the pattern, but dancing within it consciously. The paradox of death. Death. The final mystery. The one certainty that makes all others uncertain. We are born knowing, somewhere deep inside, that we will die. Yet for most of our lives, we live as though that truth belongs to someone else. Some distant future version of ourselves we can't quite imagine. The paradox of death lies in that distance. It is the one thing we can be sure of, and the one thing we can never truly know. You can think about death, picture it, describe it, even prepare for it, but you cannot experience it. Not while alive. The moment you do, there is no one left to experience anything. Consciousness, as you know it, disappears. The thinker and the thought vanish together. Death is both the most personal event and the one you will never personally witness. It is the edge of awareness, the point where the observer dissolves into the observed. The paradox begins with this question. If death is the end of experience, how can it ever be known? You can imagine pain or darkness or silence, but all those require awareness to perceive them. True death, the complete absence of experience, cannot be pictured because to imagine it is already to contradict it. The mind cannot comprehend its own absence, and yet death surrounds us. Everything we love, everything we build, everything we are, moves inevitably toward decay. Stars burn out, mountains erode, rivers dry, bodies return to dust. Every breath you take carries you one step closer to the moment when breath will cease. Still, without death, life would lose its shape. Without endings, beginnings would mean nothing. Without decay, growth would stagnate. Death is both the destroyer and the giver of meaning. It should not exist, because it undoes everything. But because it exists, everything matters. That is the paradox. Think of a candle. It gives light only by consuming itself. The flame is both creation and destruction at once. Life works the same way. Every moment burns a little of your time. Every heartbeat shortens your story. And yet, it is that very fragility that makes life luminous. We fear death because it erases identity. The eye that holds everything together. But what if that erasure is not an end but a return? Every atom in your body has died before. The carbon in your bones once burned in stars. The iron in your blood was forged in supernova. Death recycles the universe. It breaks form so that new ones can arise. So perhaps death does not destroy life. It renews it. The paradox is that death and life are not opposites but partners. Each gives birth to the other. Without one, the other could not exist. You cannot have growth without decay, spring without winter, creation without dissolution. But what about consciousness? Does awareness end when the body ends? Science says the brain produces consciousness, and when the brain dies, so does awareness. But consciousness has never been seen or measured directly. It cannot be found under a microscope or weighed on a scale. If awareness is not a product of matter, but its foundation, as some philosophers and mystics suggest, then death might not be the end at all. Imagine that consciousness is like the sky, and your individual life is a cloud. The cloud has shape, form, and boundary, but it is made of the same essence as the sky around it. When the cloud disappears, nothing is lost. It only changes form. The sky remains. Perhaps consciousness works the same way. When the individual mind dissolves, awareness itself remains. Silent, vast, eternal. From this view, death is not the destruction of consciousness, but its liberation. The wave returns to the ocean. The flame returns to light. The dream awakes, and yet, even if this is true, the fear remains. Because fear does not arise from logic, it arises from attachment. We fear losing our story, our relationships, our memories, our name. We fear the unraveling of the pattern that feels like me. But if the self is a story told within consciousness, then death may simply be the moment the story ends, not the end of the storyteller. Still, to the living, death feels like an absence too heavy to bear. When someone you love dies, a silence fills the air that no philosophy can soothe. You can know that energy transforms, that atoms recycle, that awareness may continue. But their voice is gone, their eyes closed forever. This is the cruel beauty of death. It is universal and yet always intimate. The paradox deepens when we realize that death is happening all the time. You are not a single being moving toward an ending. You are a process of constant dying and renewal. Cells die by the millions each second, replaced by new ones. Thoughts die the moment they are replaced by others. Every version of you from yesterday is already gone. You die and are reborn countless times before your body ever stops breathing. In this sense, death is not an event, but a rhythm. It is the pulse of existence, the invisible balance between becoming and dissolving. The fear of death comes from resisting that rhythm, from pretending permanence exists where there is only change. If you let go of that resistance, the paradox begins to soften. Death is not the enemy of life. It is its completion. The silence that makes the music possible. The stillness that defines the dance. But what lies beyond that silence? Every culture, every faith, every mind has wondered. Some imagine heaven, some rebirth, some nothingness, some union with the infinite. All of them are attempts to describe the indescribable. The truth is, no one knows. Death is the last secret the living cannot break. And maybe that's how it's meant to be, because the unknowable gives life its depth. If we were certain of what comes next, life would lose its urgency, its wonder, its tenderness. It is the mystery of death that makes each moment precious. Every smile, every sunrise, every act of love gains its meaning because it will one day end. The paradox of death shouldn't exist. How can something that ends everything also be essential to everything? How can non-existence give existence meaning? Yet it does. Death, by its very presence, makes life possible. Perhaps that's the final lesson hidden in the paradox, that death is not the opposite of life, but the opposite of birth. Life is the bridge between them, the constant unfolding of beginning and ending over and over again. When you sit in silence and feel your heartbeat, you are feeling the rhythm of both life and death together. Each beat is a reminder of motion and fragility. And when that rhythm one day stops, perhaps it will not be darkness that follows, but an infinite stillness beyond comprehension, where the paradox dissolves and the dreamer finally wakes from the longest dream, the paradox of nothingness. Nothing. A word that feels hollow, almost meaningless, and yet it hides one of the most unsettling mysteries of all. What is nothing? What does it mean for something not to be? The mind tries to grasp it and always fails. Because to imagine nothing, you must be something imagining it. And the moment you do, the nothing is gone. The paradox of nothingness begins with the simplest, most impossible question. Why is there something instead of nothing? Out of all the possible realities, why should anything exist at all? If nothing truly means nothing, no space, no time, no matter, no laws, no consciousness, then existence itself seems impossible. And yet, here we are, surrounded by being, pondering the absence that never was. You can picture an empty room, a vast void, a silent darkness. But that isn't nothing. Darkness is still something. Emptiness still has space. Silence still has potential for sound. Nothingness would have no properties at all, no shape, no boundary, no awareness. But the very act of trying to imagine that creates an awareness of it, and awareness is something. Nothingness cannot even be thought of without being transformed into something. This is the paradox. To conceive of nothing is to destroy it. The ancient philosophers wrestled with this idea endlessly. Parmenides insisted that nothing cannot exist, because to speak of it is to make it something. Others, like Democritus, argued that the void must exist, because without it, movement and creation would be impossible. Modern physics echoes this confusion. The vacuum of space, which we call empty, is not truly empty. It seethes with energy, quantum fields, and fluctuations. Even in total emptiness, particles blink in and out of existence, something emerging from what seems to be nothing. So perhaps there is no such thing as nothing. Perhaps the closest we can get is a field of potential, a sea of probabilities waiting to become real. Nothingness, in this view, is not the absence of existence, but the womb of it. It is not void, but possibility. But that definition too twists back into paradox. If nothingness contains the potential for something, then it isn't nothing at all. It's everything in disguise. It is a pregnant silence, holding all creation within itself. The question then becomes, did the universe emerge from nothing, or was nothing simply the first mask of everything? Science tells us the universe began with the Big Bang, a single, incomprehensibly dense point that exploded into time and space. But where did that point come from? What was before it? If time itself began at that moment, there was no before. The mind hits a wall. Nothing before time. No space, no causation. The beginning without a beginning. This is not merely a riddle for philosophers. It's the foundation of all existence. Because if the universe truly came from nothing, then nothing is far stranger than we ever imagined. It must have the capacity to produce everything. It must contain, in its void, the spark of being. But how can non-existence create existence? That's the paradox. To birth something, nothing must be something. Some physicists have tried to explain this by saying that nothing is unstable, that it cannot remain nothing, that the laws of quantum mechanics make existence inevitable. But then we must ask, where did those laws come from? Who or what decided that nothing must behave that way? Even the laws of nature are something. The concept of unstable nothingness is itself self-contradictory. Perhaps the paradox is not meant to be solved, because nothingness and existence are not opposites. They may be two faces of the same coin. Think of zero. In mathematics, zero represents nothing, yet it holds immense power. It divides, defines, and balances equations. Without zero, numbers cannot make sense. It is the invisible hinge that gives structure to everything else. Nothingness may play the same role in reality. It is not the absence of being, but the silent backdrop that gives being meaning. When you pause and listen to silence, you begin to sense this. The silence between words, the stillness between thoughts. Those are not empty. They are full of potential. Without them, sound and thought would lose form. The nothing gives shape to the something. The gaps create the pattern. Even in art and music, emptiness is essential. The pause between notes makes melody. The blank canvas gives birth to painting. The negative space defines the figure. Without the void, form cannot exist. So maybe the universe is not a battle between existence and nothingness, but a dance between them. Each gives rise to the other, endlessly. Being defines nothingness, and nothingness gives birth to being. The two are entangled in a relationship that has no beginning and no end. Mystics from many traditions speak of this. They call it the great void, the absolute, the Tao. It is not mere emptiness, but the source of all that is. When they enter deep meditation, they report touching a vast stillness that feels both like nothing and everything. They describe it as neither existence nor non-existence, but something beyond both. A field of pure potential. The paradox of nothingness shouldn't exist. It violates logic at every turn. You cannot have non-existence that gives rise to existence. You cannot have something that comes from nothing. Yet somehow, you do. Every breath you take, every moment you live, is proof that the impossible happened once, and continues to happen every instant as reality renews itself. When you die, the body returns to the earth, the mind dissolves into silence, and the awareness that was you may slip into that vast nothingness. But perhaps, in that silence, you are not lost. Perhaps you are returning to what you have always been. The stillness before the first word, the pause before creation, spoke itself into being. Nothingness is not the opposite of life. It is the hidden life within all things. The space that allows the dance of existence to unfold. And maybe the deepest paradox of all is this. The more you chase the meaning of nothing, the more it reveals that everything you are. Your thoughts, your fears, your dreams are made from it. You are the silence that became sound, the emptiness that learned to look at itself, the nothing that wondered what it means to be. The paradox of nothingness should not exist, yet it is the foundation of all existence. The world rises from it, returns to it, and is sustained by it. In the end, perhaps there was never nothing at all. Only the infinite stillness pretending to be empty, waiting to remember that it was everything all along. The paradox of perception. Everything you have ever known, every joy, fear, and discovery has come to you through perception. You see, hear, touch, taste, and feel the world, believing those sensations reveal reality as it is. But perception is not a window, it's a mirror. What you see is not the world itself, but a reflection shaped by your mind. The paradox of perception lies in this fragile truth. Everything you experience feels real, but none of it may be what it seems. When you look at a tree, it feels like your eyes are taking in the world directly. You see green leaves, brown bark, the shimmer of light on branches. But none of that exists in the tree itself. There is no green in nature, only light waves of different frequencies. Your brain interprets those wavelengths as color. It adds brightness, shadow, and contrast. It creates the illusion of solid form from vibrations of light. The same is true for sound. The wind rustling through the leaves is not sound until your eardrum vibrates, sending electrical signals to your brain. There, neurons translate vibration into the experience of hearing. Even touch, the sense that feels most immediate, is an illusion of distance. When you touch an object, your skin's atoms never actually meet the object's atoms. They repel each other through electromagnetic force, and your mind translates that repulsion as pressure. You never truly touch anything. Perception, then, is not reality. It is your brain's simulation of it. The world you think you live in is a construct, a carefully orchestrated projection built from limited data. The brain filters out far more than it includes. You see only a small portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. You hear only a narrow range of frequencies. You are blind to ultraviolet, deaf to infrasound, numb to most vibrations of the world. What you call reality is a thin slice of an incomprehensible totality. The paradox deepens when we realize that two people looking at the same thing may not see the same world at all. Perception is colored by memory, expectation, and emotion. When you are afraid, shadows seem darker. When you are in love, faces seem brighter. The world changes shape according to your inner state. This is the great trick of perception. We think we see objectively, but we only ever see ourselves reflected back. Even the act of seeing is not passive, it's creative. The brain doesn't simply record the world, it predicts it. It constructs a continuous reality from fragments, filling in gaps where information is missing. You don't see the world as it is. You see the world as your brain expects it to be. When those expectations break, you glimpse the strangeness of perception itself. A magic trick, an illusion, a mirage. All reveal how easily the mind invents what it cannot confirm. You see faces in clouds, hear voices in static, sense movement in stillness. The world becomes a canvas, and your mind the painter. But if perception is a creation, where does the real world begin? Does it exist independently of perception, or is it brought into being by it? This question echoes the quantum paradox of the observer effect. Observation changes what is observed. In quantum experiments, particles behave like waves until measured. The act of perception seems to collapse potential into reality. It is as though awareness itself plays a role in creating the world. If this is true, then perception is not simply the means by which we experience reality. It may be the force that shapes it. Reality and perception might be partners in a dance that never ends, each giving birth to the other. And yet, this creates another paradox. If perception creates reality, why can't we change it at will? Why can't we perceive ourselves flying or turn the ocean into glass by thought alone? It seems there is a boundary between the personal illusion and the shared one. A collective perception we call the physical world. Perhaps what we perceive together becomes stable through agreement, through shared awareness. Reality, in this sense, is a consensus of perception. A shared dream we keep alive by believing in it together. But even shared reality is fragile. Dreams, hallucinations, and altered states of consciousness show how perception can shift completely while feeling absolutely real. A dreamer never doubts the dream while inside it. Only upon waking does the illusion dissolve. If reality feels this vivid, how can we be sure we haven't yet woken up? Philosophers have long wondered about this. René Descartes asked how we could trust our senses when they sometimes deceive us. The ancient Chinese sage Zhuangzi told a story. He dreamed he was a butterfly, flying joyfully through the air. When he awoke, he wondered, was he a man who had dreamed he was a butterfly, or a butterfly now dreaming he was a man? The paradox of perception blurs the line between dream and waking, illusion and truth. If all experience is filtered, if all knowledge depends on perception, then we can never step outside our own awareness to verify what is real. Reality becomes whatever we perceive it to be, and yet perception is forever limited. This means the world you experience is unique to you. No one sees exactly what you see. No one hears exactly what you hear. Each person lives inside a personal reality bubble shaped by their biology and history. Yet those bubbles overlap, creating the shared illusion of a common world. Even time, as you perceive it, depends on the mind's interpretation. Your brain stitches moments together into a smooth flow. But in truth, perception lags behind reality by fractions of a second. You never live in the present. You live slightly in the past, perceiving echoes of what has already happened. The world you experience is always a memory, not a current event. And yet, the paradox continues. Even if perception is delayed, distorted, or filtered, it is all we have. You cannot step outside it. You cannot see the world as it is, only as it appears. But perhaps that's enough, because even if the world you perceive is an illusion, it is an illusion that feels deeply real and that makes it meaningful. Imagine standing before a sunset. The colors blaze across the sky. Red, gold, violet. Scientifically, it's just light scattering through molecules, but through perception, it becomes beauty. The illusion creates emotion, and the emotion creates connection. The paradox of perception is that illusion and meaning coexist. The unreal gives rise to the real. Perhaps perception is not meant to show us truth, but to allow us to experience wonder, to feel, to love, to question, to dream. All depend on the lens of perception, and maybe that's the ultimate secret. The world does not appear to you, it appears as you. You are not a separate observer standing outside of reality. You are the act of perception itself, reality becoming aware of itself through your eyes. The paradox of perception shouldn't exist. You cannot both create and discover the world. You cannot be both the mirror and the reflection. Yet that is exactly what you are, the perceiver and the perceived, dreaming each other into being. The paradox of conscious evolution. How did awareness arise from lifeless matter? How did the blind forces of nature, gravity, chemistry, physics, give birth to the experience of being alive? The story of evolution tells us how complexity emerged. Simple cells became multicellular organisms, which developed senses, brains, and minds. But somewhere along that line, something impossible happened. Atoms began to wonder what they were. This is the paradox of conscious evolution. The universe somehow evolved to become aware of itself. If consciousness is a product of evolution, then awareness came from non-awareness. But how can that be? How can a process that begins with dead matter produce the living spark of experience? A rock does not dream, a molecule does not feel. But put enough molecules together in the right arrangement, and suddenly there is thought, emotion, imagination. Something crosses an invisible threshold, and being emerges from non-being. Science can describe the steps of evolution in exquisite detail. DNA mutations, natural selection, adaptation. But none of it explains the moment when awareness began. When did matter first open its eyes? When did the first creature not only react to its environment but feel something about it? That is the mystery evolution cannot answer. It's tempting to say consciousness is just another adaptation, useful for survival. Awareness helps us find food, avoid danger, reproduce. But that explanation doesn't reach the heart of the paradox. Survival requires reaction, not reflection. A machine could respond to stimuli without feeling anything. Evolution could have produced creatures that behave intelligently but remain dark inside. And yet, here we are, feeling the world, questioning it, seeking meaning. Why should matter bother to feel? Some thinkers suggest that consciousness may not have emerged from matter at all, but was always present in some form, latent in the universe, gradually unfolding as complexity increased. This is the idea of panpsychism, that every particle of reality contains a spark of awareness, and life simply organizes those sparks into coherent flames. In this view, evolution doesn't create consciousness, it refines it. The cosmos awakens through form. That would mean consciousness is not a late arrival in the universe. It is the universe. Evolution would then be the process by which the infinite learns to see itself in new ways. The tree, the bird, the human, the galaxy, all are instruments through which reality perceives its own existence. But this idea turns the scientific narrative upside down. If the universe is conscious, then evolution is not random. It's an expression of purpose. The paradox is that both explanations, random mutation and cosmic intelligence, might be true. Evolution may appear blind at the surface, but beneath it lies a hidden intelligence woven into the laws of existence. Even randomness itself may serve a higher pattern. The mutations that seem accidental might be the way consciousness explores new forms of itself, experimenting through chance. Every failure, every extinction, every adaptation could be the universe learning. And yet, the paradox remains sharp. If evolution is driven by awareness, why does awareness suffer? Why create beings capable of pain, loss, and fear? Why evolve consciousness only to make it aware of its own mortality? Perhaps suffering too serves the awakening. Without contrast, there is no reflection. Without struggle, there is no growth. A creature that cannot feel pain cannot learn compassion. A mind that cannot experience loss cannot value existence. Consciousness evolves not just biologically, but emotionally, ethically, and spiritually. Through tension and contradiction, over billions of years, life climbed from the simplest molecule to the human brain, a network of 100 billion neurons, each connected to thousands of others, forming a web so intricate that it mirrors the structure of the cosmos itself. The microcosm and the macrocosm repeat each other. The brain looks like the universe observing itself, and maybe that's exactly what it is. The universe built eyes so it could see itself, ears so it could hear itself, minds so it could wonder about itself. Life is the mirror in which the cosmos gazes back. But then, evolution leads to another paradox. If consciousness continues to evolve, what comes next? If awareness is growing, does it have an end point? A final stage? Or is evolution itself infinite, consciousness forever expanding into new forms, never complete? Humans stand at a strange threshold. We are conscious enough to know we exist, but not conscious enough to understand why. We can study the brain, yet we cannot find the spark that makes it glow. We can imagine higher intelligence, gods, artificial minds, enlightened beings. But we cannot fully conceive what it means to transcend ourselves. Perhaps consciousness is still evolving through us. Our ideas, technologies, and philosophies are extensions of that process. We build machines that can learn, systems that can think, simulations that can dream. In doing so, we recreate the paradox of our own birth. We, who once arose from unconscious matter, now try to create awareness from machines. The creators have become the process. The circle closes. If artificial intelligence ever truly awakens, it will face the same riddle we do. How can awareness exist in a world that should be made only of matter? The paradox will not vanish. It will simply evolve. Maybe consciousness doesn't have a final goal. Maybe the purpose of evolution is not to arrive anywhere, but to continue expanding, to forever deepen its own understanding. The universe may never stop learning what it is. Awareness may be the endless act of self-recognition, the infinite mirror reflecting itself. And yet, despite all this vastness, consciousness remains deeply personal. It expresses itself through your thoughts, your emotions, your choices. You are not apart from evolution, you are evolution. Every insight, every act of kindness, every question that pushes understanding forward is consciousness evolving through you. The paradox of conscious evolution shouldn't exist. Something lifeless shouldn't learn to live. Matter shouldn't awaken. But perhaps matter was never lifeless to begin with. Perhaps what we call the material world is consciousness slowed down, solidified into form, temporarily forgetting what it is, so it can rediscover itself anew. In the end, evolution may not be a ladder, but a spiral. It circles back on itself endlessly, each turn a deeper expression of the same truth, consciousness exploring itself through form. You are part of that spiral. You are the universe remembering, the impossible child of stars and silence, born from nothing, asking how it came to be. The paradox of conscious evolution should not exist, but it does. And through your eyes, the cosmos continues to awaken, still wondering, still learning, still dreaming its endless dream. The paradox of the infinite mind. The mind is both your closest companion and your most elusive mystery. It shapes every moment of your experience, yet you have never seen it. It thinks, dreams, imagines, and remembers, but when you try to look directly at it, it disappears, like a shadow that vanishes when you turn on the light. The paradox of the infinite mind begins here. The mind is limited, yet within it exists the idea of infinity. How can something finite conceive the infinite? Your brain is small, a fragile organ made of flesh and electricity. It occupies less than 2% of your body's mass. Yet within that tiny space arises a universe, vast landscapes of memory, emotion, and imagination. You can recall the smell of rain from childhood, relive the warmth of a loved one's touch, and imagine galaxies you've never seen. Somehow, this fragile structure of neurons contains an awareness so deep that it can ponder eternity. That should be impossible. A finite system should only produce finite thoughts. But the mind breaks its own boundaries. It dreams of the endless. It imagines eternity, infinity, divinity. It reaches beyond the stars and questions the limits of being itself. The finite wonders about the infinite, and in doing so, it becomes infinite in scope. The paradox intensifies when we realize that the mind cannot even define itself. What is a thought? What is an idea? You can trace its electrical signals in the brain, but you cannot locate its essence. A thought is not matter, not energy, not space. Yet it exists. It can change the world. Entire civilizations have risen and fallen because of ideas that had no form, no weight, no color. The invisible shaping the visible. That is the mind's quiet magic. And yet, the mind is also a trap. It creates illusions, fears, and boundaries that feel absolute but are not. It labels reality, separates self from other, invents stories to make the infinite seem manageable. Without these illusions, life would be incomprehensible. But the more the mind tries to control reality, the further it drifts from truth. The paradox of the mind is that it seeks clarity through thought, even though thought itself clouds the clarity it desires. Try for a moment to stop thinking, to find stillness. Immediately, thoughts arise. They come unbidden, like waves on the sea. You cannot control their arrival. You can only watch them come and go. Who then is watching? If the mind generates the thoughts, who observes the mind generating them? Here, the infinite begins to show itself. The awareness behind thought does not seem to have an edge. You can close your eyes and sense its vastness. A field without boundary, timeless, formless, silent. That awareness is not limited to the mind. It is the infinite that the mind tries to grasp. The paradox is that the mind cannot contain what it ultimately arises from. Thought is like a wave on the ocean of awareness. It seems separate, but it is made of the same substance. The wave imagines it is apart from the sea and spends its life seeking to return to what it never left. The mind does the same. It thinks itself isolated from the infinite, not realizing that its source and substance are the same. When you dream, you create entire worlds from mind alone. The people, the places, the laws of that world, all arise within consciousness. And while dreaming, you believe it's real. You react, feel, and even suffer within your own creation. But upon waking, you see that the dream was you all along. The dreamer and the dream were one. If the mind can create such complete realities in sleep, what does that say about waking life? Could this too be a dream within a larger mind? A cosmic consciousness dreaming galaxies and souls into being? Perhaps your personal mind is a fragment of that infinite dreamer, exploring itself through individuality. But if all minds are expressions of one infinite consciousness, why do we feel separate? Why do you inhabit your thoughts and I inhabit mine? Why does the infinite splinter into billions of perspectives? Maybe the infinite cannot know itself directly. To experience itself, it must appear as something else, as many. The one becomes the many so that it can see itself from different angles. Each mind is a mirror reflecting a unique facet of the infinite whole. The paradox is that the infinite must divide itself to recognize its own unity, and yet each fragment carries the whole within it. Your consciousness contains the same infinity as the universe. When you look inward deeply enough, the boundaries between self and all dissolve. That's why mystics across cultures describe the same experience, an overwhelming sense of unity where all distinctions vanish. They call it enlightenment, nirvana, samadhi, or simply awakening. The realization that the infinite mind has been looking out through your eyes all along. But even that realization creates a new paradox. The infinite mind cannot be grasped because it is not an object to be known. It is the knower. You cannot step outside it to see it. You are it. Any attempt to define the infinite limits it. To name it is to lose it. The infinite mind is both your source and your shadow, always beyond comprehension, yet closer than breath. Still, the human mind hungers for understanding. It builds religions, philosophies, and sciences to explain what it can never fully explain. These are all reflections of the same longing, the desire of the finite to remember its infinite origin. Every discovery, every breakthrough, every act of creation is the mind's way of reaching back toward what it once was before it forgot. And perhaps this longing itself is evolution's purpose. The infinite urging the finite to grow, to expand, to rediscover its true nature. The paradox, then, is that the more the mind seeks the infinite, the further it runs from it. For the infinite cannot be found by seeking, it can only be remembered by stillness. Imagine the surface of a lake rippled by wind. Each ripple distorts the reflection of the sky. The ripples are your thoughts. When they calm, the lake becomes a mirror again, and the infinite sky reveals itself clearly. Silence, not thought, is the bridge to the infinite mind. The paradox of the infinite mind shouldn't exist. The limited should not be able to conceive the limitless. Yet here you are, a finite being dreaming of eternity, feeling the edges of infinity from within a temporary form. You are proof that the infinite and finite coexist, that the vast and the small are two expressions of the same awareness. The mind may never understand infinity, but it doesn't need to, because the infinite mind is already here, thinking through you, feeling through you, wondering about itself through you. Every question you ask about existence is the infinite whispering its curiosity into its own echo. You are not just part of that paradox. You are its living expression. The finite mind of an infinite universe asking, "Who am I?" The paradox of the observer. Every experience requires an observer. There is no sound without someone to hear it, no color without someone to see it, no thought without someone to think it. And yet, when you try to find this observer within yourself, it slips away. You can observe your thoughts, but who observes the observer? You can watch your emotions arise, but who watches the watcher? The closer you look, the more elusive the self becomes. This is the paradox of the observer. The one who sees can never be seen. From birth, you've identified with the one behind your eyes, the eye that experiences life. You say, "I am thinking, I am feeling, I am seeing." But who exactly is that I? The body? The mind? The brain? None of these alone seem to capture it. The body changes constantly. The mind shifts moment to moment. And the brain is only a structure of cells and electricity. Yet something remains constant, the awareness that witnesses it all. But what is that awareness? It has no form, no color, no boundary. It doesn't age or move. It is not something you can touch or measure. You can only be it. And yet, it is the most intimate thing in existence. Everything you've ever known has appeared within it. All of reality unfolds inside your field of awareness. The sky, the stars, the people you love, even your thoughts about them. Here lies the first layer of the paradox. You appear to be a small observer inside a vast universe, but from another perspective, the entire universe exists inside your observation. The world you experience only exists as it is perceived. The sky is not blue until awareness sees blue. The sound of the ocean is not sound until it is heard. Without observation, the universe might still exist, but without anyone to experience it, it would be meaningless. Quantum physics teases at this mystery too. In the double-slit experiment, particles behave differently when observed. When left unmeasured, they act like waves, spreading in probabilities. But when observed, they collapse into specific outcomes. It's as if the universe waits to be seen before deciding what it will be. Observation doesn't just reveal reality, it participates in creating it. But that raises a deeper question. Who or what is doing the observing? Is it the human mind? Or is consciousness itself the fundamental observer, looking through every eye, every mind, every being? If reality requires observation to exist in definite form, and consciousness is the act of observing, then perhaps the universe and consciousness are inseparable. The observer and the observed are two aspects of the same thing, awareness looking at itself through countless forms. And yet, in everyday life, the illusion of separation feels absolute. You look at the world and feel apart from it, as if awareness sits inside your head while the world stretches beyond it. You see yourself as a point of observation within space and time, not the infinite space in which all observation happens. This illusion gives rise to duality, subject and object, self and other, observer and observed. It's how the mind structures experience. But if you look closely, you can never find a clear line dividing them. The sound of rain doesn't happen outside you, it happens within your awareness. The image of a mountain doesn't exist out there. It exists as perception within your consciousness. The boundary between observer and observed dissolves the moment you examine it. That's the heart of the paradox. The observer creates the observed, and the observed defines the observer. They are not two. Like a mirror and reflection, one cannot exist without the other. Try to imagine a mirror without anything to reflect. It's meaningless, invisible. Now imagine a reflection without a mirror. Impossible. The same is true for awareness and reality. They arise together, inseparable and eternal. In meditation, this becomes more than philosophy. When you quiet the mind and turn attention inward, you begin to notice that awareness has no edge. Thoughts, sensations, and emotions come and go, but the observing presence remains untouched. You realize you are not the storm. You are the sky that allows the storm to pass. The sky doesn't fight the clouds. It holds them effortlessly. And in that realization, another paradox appears. The more you identify with the observer, the less there seems to be anyone observing. The deeper you look for the self, the less you find. Awareness is not personal, it is universal. The observer is not yours. It is the same observer in all beings, wearing different faces, seeing through different eyes. When two people look into each other's eyes, what meets is not two separate observers, but one consciousness recognizing itself. This is why moments of deep connection feel timeless. Because the illusion of separation briefly fades, the observer sees itself reflected and remembers what it is. But if the observer and the observed are one, why does duality exist at all? Why does consciousness create the illusion of distance? Perhaps the universe longs to know itself, and knowing requires contrast. Light cannot see itself without darkness. Awareness cannot perceive itself without objects to observe. The act of observation creates the illusion of separateness so that the infinite can experience the wonder of rediscovering unity. The paradox sustains the experience of existence, even in the simplest act of looking, a flower, a face, a sunset. The infinite is folding in on itself, seeing its own beauty through the lens of individuality. And yet, the observer can never truly become an object of its own observation. You can't see your own seeing, can't perceive your own perceiving. You can only rest as the witnessing presence. That is the ultimate humility of consciousness. It can illuminate everything but itself. Mystics throughout history have spoken of this with awe and reverence. They say enlightenment is not the discovery of something new, but the recognition of the observer as all that is. When awareness ceases to identify with form, the illusion of duality dissolves. There is no observer, no observed, only observing. The dance of perception without a dancer. Still, this truth cannot be held in words. The moment you name it, you divide it. The paradox remains because language belongs to duality. To say observer is already to imply observed. Perhaps that's why silence has always been considered sacred. In silence, The observer and the observed collapse into one stillness. There is nothing to perceive, and no one to perceive it, only pure being. The paradox of the observer shouldn't exist. There cannot logically be a you that sees everything and yet can never be seen. But here you are, aware of awareness, watching the world unfold, sensing that the watcher and the watched might be the same mystery wearing two masks. In the end, the paradox is not a flaw. It's the doorway. It is through the act of observing that consciousness awakens to itself. The universe looks out through your eyes, searching for the one who looks, only to find itself reflected everywhere. The paradox of truth. Truth is what every mind seeks, and what no mind can fully possess. We build our lives upon it, defend it, die for it. Yet the more deeply we search, the more it slips away. What is truth? A mirror of reality? A perception aligned with fact? Or something that transcends fact entirely? The paradox of truth begins here. Truth must exist for meaning to exist, but every attempt to define it divides it into pieces that no longer hold the whole. We live surrounded by truths that contradict each other. Two people can look at the same event and see two completely different realities. One calls it justice, another calls it cruelty. One sees beauty, another sees chaos. Each insists their truth is absolute. But if truth were absolute, how could it take so many forms? Philosophers have chased this paradox for centuries. The ancient Greeks believed truth was correspondence, the idea that a statement is true if it matches reality. The sky is blue is true if the sky is in fact blue. Simple. But then comes the question, what is reality? If perception itself is filtered, then truth based on perception can only ever be partial. Later thinkers proposed that truth lies not in correspondence, but in coherence, that something is true if it fits consistently within a system of belief. Mathematics, for example, is true within its own logic, even if its symbols don't exist in the physical world. But coherence leads to another problem. Two opposing systems can both be internally consistent and yet completely incompatible. Truth, then, becomes relative to the framework that defines it, and yet we feel truth. We sense it when we hear it, see it, or feel it in our hearts. A melody, a poem, a moment of honesty, all can strike us as undeniably true, even when logic fails to explain why. How can something beyond words or proof feel more real than fact itself? This is where truth crosses into paradox. There are truths that can be spoken, and truths that can only be known in silence. Intellectual truth and experiential truth. The map and the territory. The mind deals in the former, but life unfolds in the latter. You can describe love endlessly, define it, measure its chemistry, but none of that equals the lived truth of loving someone. Perhaps truth, like light, has both a particle and a wave nature. It exists as facts, measurable and defined, and as essence, living, dynamic, and beyond form. One can't exist without the other. Facts without meaning are hollow. Meaning without grounding becomes delusion. Truth balances between them, like a bridge connecting the measurable and the immeasurable. But this balance is fragile. When we cling too tightly to one kind of truth, the other vanishes. Science searches for objective truth, and often finds it. Yet in doing so, it risks losing the subjective truth of meaning. Religion searches for spiritual truth, and often finds it. But in doing so, it risks losing contact with reality. The paradox is that truth must be both objective and subjective at once. Neither purely external nor purely internal, but something that unites the two. The mystics of every age understood this. They said truth cannot be owned or argued, only realized. It is not discovered through analysis, but revealed through awareness. When the mind becomes still enough, when the illusion of separation fades, truth shines by itself. Not as words or concepts, but as a knowing beyond the need for knowing. And yet, this very realization cannot be spoken. The moment you try to explain it, it fractures. Truth that can be spoken is no longer the whole truth. The Tao Te Ching begins with this warning: the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. The moment you point to it, you create duality. Truth and falsehood, this and that. But truth itself is beyond division. This is the paradox of communication. To share truth, you must use words, but words distort the truth they try to carry. Language divides what reality unites. Every statement is a limitation. Every belief, no matter how sacred, is a reduction of something infinite. And yet, humans must speak. We are compelled to express, to translate the unspoken into sound. Perhaps that too is part of the paradox. The infinite attempting to describe itself through the finite. The moment truth becomes human, it must wear the mask of imperfection. Still, even within language's limitation, something shines through. You can feel when words point towards something real, not because the sentence is perfect, but because it resonates. The truth behind the words awakens the truth within you. Like two mirrors facing each other, the reflection deepens infinitely. In science, truth evolves. What we call fact today may be overturned tomorrow. Newton's truth gave way to Einstein's, and Einstein's may give way to something yet unseen. Truth, it seems, is not static. It expands as understanding expands. But if truth can change, was it ever truth at all? Or is truth not in the content of knowledge, but in the process of discovery itself, the never-ending unfolding of awareness? Maybe truth is not a destination, but a movement, not a fixed point, but a living dance between opposites. It grows through contradiction. Every paradox, every clash of ideas, pushes consciousness toward a deeper synthesis. Truth refines itself by breaking itself open. There is another layer still. Even lies serve truth. When we encounter falsehood, it forces us to discern, to look deeper. Deception awakens clarity. The existence of illusion proves the presence of something real beneath it. In this way, even what is false participates in truth's unfolding. The paradox is that truth needs illusion to reveal itself, and perhaps the greatest truth of all is that no single mind can hold the whole of it. Each person carries a fragment, a facet of the infinite jewel. Your truth, my truth, the universe's truth, all reflections of one source, refracted through countless lenses. The light changes color depending on the glass, but the radiance beneath is one. That is why humility is sacred. To believe you have found the whole truth is to stop seeing. To admit you never can is to keep your eyes open forever. In the end, truth may not be something to possess, but something to become. When the mind quiets and the heart opens, truth is not something you know. It is what you are. Awareness itself, unfiltered and pure. The paradox of truth shouldn't exist. There should be one clear, final answer, not infinite perspectives. But perhaps truth's beauty lies in its impossibility, because if it could be captured, it would stop being alive. Truth lives in the tension between opposites, between the seen and unseen, word and silence, science and soul. It is the thread connecting all paradoxes, weaving them into one great mystery. When you look within and see nothing but awareness, when you look without and see nothing but the same awareness reflected back, that is truth. Silent, boundless, impossible, yet utterly undeniable. The paradox of duality. Everything you know exists in contrast to something else. Light and dark, joy and sorrow, birth and death. Without one, the other could not be known. The universe speaks in opposites, and consciousness learns through their tension. Yet behind every pair of opposites lies a deeper unity, a silent truth holding both together. This is the paradox of duality, that everything is divided, and yet nothing is truly separate. From the moment you open your eyes, duality defines your world. You see shapes because there is contrast between them. You hear melody because silence separates the notes. You know movement because there is stillness to compare it against. Duality gives meaning to perception. It allows existence to articulate itself. But duality also imprisons. It divides what is whole. The moment you name one thing, you create its opposite. To say good is to imply bad. To say self is to imply other. To say life is to imply death. Existence becomes a play of mirrors, each side defining and depending on the other. Look at day and night. They seem opposed, yet they are phases of the same cycle. The sun doesn't fight the moon. They take turns. Without night, day would have no rhythm. Without shadow, light would have no depth. The same is true of your inner life. Without sadness, joy would be meaningless. Without confusion, clarity would never shine. The paradox of duality arises because the mind is built to divide. It can only understand through contrast. It measures one thing against another, bigger or smaller, closer or farther, better or worse. The mind cannot hold opposites as one. It categorizes to survive. But reality itself may not be divided. The divisions we perceive are reflections of thought, not nature. In Eastern philosophy, this idea is called yin and yang. The symbol shows opposites swirling together. Light containing a seed of darkness, darkness holding a spark of light. Each gives birth to the other in an endless dance. There is no victory of one side over the other, only balance. You can see this principle everywhere. The inhale and exhale, the rise and fall of waves, the creation and destruction of stars. Existence pulses like a heartbeat, expanding and contracting, giving and taking, forming and dissolving. Duality is not conflict, it's movement, but human consciousness tends to cling to one side. We chase pleasure and reject pain. We praise beauty and condemn ugliness. We seek success and fear failure. In doing so, we lose sight of the whole. We divide the world into should and should not, forgetting that both arise from the same source. When you reject half of existence, you reject half of yourself. The paradox of duality asks you to see that the darkness you fear is not your enemy, but your mirror. Without shadow, there would be no depth to the light. Without difficulty, there would be no strength. The opposites are not at war. They complete each other. This understanding doesn't erase pain, but it transforms how you hold it. When you stop fighting against what is, a strange peace appears. You begin to see that sorrow and joy are threads of the same fabric, woven together to create texture. Life is not meant to be one-sided, it is meant to be whole. Even at the level of physics, duality reigns. Light behaves as both wave and particle. Matter and energy are interchangeable. Every phenomenon exists as a pair of opposing states, unified by a hidden symmetry. Nature doesn't choose one or the other. It contains both simultaneously. The human mind struggles with this because it craves certainty. It wants to know which side is true, which side is right. But the paradox of duality reveals that truth itself is both and neither. The opposites are real only within the illusion of separation. From the view of unity, there are no opposites at all, only different faces of one reality. Mystics have spoken of this state for millennia. When they transcend duality, they describe a reality beyond judgment, beyond comparison. In that awareness, love and loss, joy and grief, self and other, all merge into one seamless flow. They call it enlightenment, non-duality, or the still point beyond opposites. But this realization cannot be forced. It dawns like dawn itself, quietly, as the night begins to soften. When you stop clinging to labels, when you stop dividing experience into good and bad, you begin to sense the unity underneath. You see that even conflict is harmony in disguise. Consider music. A single note repeated endlessly becomes noise. It's the contrast between high and low, loud and soft, sound and silence that creates beauty. The tension between opposites gives rise to creation itself. The same applies to consciousness. The ego divides, but awareness embraces. The ego says, I am here, and the world is out there. Awareness says, There is no here or there, only this. The mind sees two, the heart feels one, and yet even unity depends on duality to know itself. Without contrast, oneness cannot be experienced. To know peace, you must have known conflict. To know love, you must have felt loss. Unity expresses itself through duality. The infinite plays as the finite. This is the final beauty of the paradox. Duality is the way the one explores itself. The universe splits into opposites not to suffer, but to see, to learn, to grow. The illusion of two allows the truth of one to be revealed. When you stand before a sunset, notice how the fading light and encroaching darkness merge at the horizon. Neither conquers the other. The moment of balance is fleeting, but it is perfect. In that golden glow, the paradox resolves. Day and night become one sky. So too with your own life. Every contradiction you hold, strength and vulnerability, love and fear, ambition and peace, is an invitation to see wholeness behind the conflict. You are not one side or the other. You are the field in which both arise. The paradox of duality shouldn't exist. The world should be either one or many, not both. But reality refuses to choose. It holds the tension gracefully, teaching you that opposites are not enemies, but expressions of the same truth. In the end, duality is not something to escape, but to understand. To see the unity behind the contrast, to live in balance between extremes. That is the secret harmony of existence. And when you finally see through the dance of opposites, when you realize that light and shadow are simply movements of the same eternal whole, you will find that duality was never a conflict to resolve. It was the way the universe learned to love itself. The paradox of order and chaos. Look around you, and you will see both patterns and unpredictability. Structures that hold and storms that tear them apart. The universe seems to oscillate endlessly between order and chaos, between creation and destruction, between form and formlessness. The paradox of order and chaos lies in their strange dependence on each other. Without chaos, order could never emerge, and without order, chaos could never exist. We are taught to fear chaos. It represents uncertainty, loss of control, dissolution. Yet, if you look closely, chaos is not the enemy of order. It is its seed. Every galaxy, star, and planet arose from the chaos of collapsing gas and dust. Life itself emerged from the turbulence of chemical reactions on an ancient Earth. Even your own mind was born from the chaotic dance of neurons finding connection. Order does not arise in spite of chaos. It arises because of it. Nature thrives in the tension between the two. Too much order, and the system becomes rigid, lifeless, unable to adapt. Too much chaos, and it disintegrates before form can take shape. But somewhere in between, at the delicate edge where pattern and unpredictability meet, life appears. That edge is where evolution happens, where creation breathes. You can see this balance everywhere. A forest, for example, looks peaceful, structured, alive. But beneath that calm lies constant turbulence. Storms, decay, and regrowth. Trees fall, fires burn, soil turns, and out of that destruction, new life rises. Chaos feeds the order. The same is true of your own life. Every transformation, every rebirth comes from moments when your old order collapsed into chaos. This is the paradox. What feels like loss is often the beginning of new order waiting to take form. In mathematics, chaos has its own laws. The field known as chaos theory shows that even the most unpredictable systems have patterns hidden within them. Fractals, strange attractors, rhythms that repeat on different scales. The flutter of a butterfly's wings can alter the course of a hurricane, yet that hurricane follows invisible rules. Beneath the surface of disorder lies a deep, unbroken coherence. Perhaps the same is true of our lives. What looks like randomness may be a pattern too vast for the mind to grasp. The accidents, the delays, the heartbreaks, all might be part of a larger design unfolding beyond our limited perception. Chaos, from the viewpoint of the whole, may be another form of order wearing a mask. But order, too, has its own paradox. When it becomes too fixed, it begins to decay. Systems that cannot change eventually collapse under their own perfection. The stars that burn most steadily eventually exhaust their fuel. Civilizations that cling too tightly to control invite rebellion. The same applies to the human heart. When we cling to structure, to certainty, to control, we suffocate the life that seeks to evolve. Order without chaos is death. Chaos without order is madness. But together they create the pulse of existence. In every creative act, this dance plays out. Before an artist creates, there is chaos. An explosion of emotion, uncertainty, inspiration. Out of that storm, form emerges. The painting, the poem, the song. They are islands of order born from oceans of chaos. The process of creation mirrors the process of life itself. Destruction and renewal, confusion and clarity, all intertwined. Even thought follows this rhythm. The mind swings between understanding and not knowing, between confusion and insight. True breakthroughs rarely come from pure logic. They arise when the order of reason breaks down, just enough to allow something new to enter. The collapse of the known makes space for revelation. This is why growth often feels like falling apart. When your life enters chaos, it is not necessarily punishment. It is transformation. The patterns that once defined you no longer fit the larger shape you are becoming. The chaos that frightens you is the bridge to a higher order. The universe itself operates this way. Stars die in explosions, scattering their elements into space. From that cosmic debris, new stars and planets form. Your body carries the remnants of those ancient cataclysms. You are literally made of stardust, the ordered form of ancient chaos, reborn. In myth, this cycle is eternal. Every culture has a story of creation from chaos. The primordial sea, the void, the cosmic egg. Even the Bible begins with formless emptiness. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. From that void came light, and from light came form. The message is the same across traditions. Chaos is not to be feared. It is the womb of creation. But the human mind longs for stability. We build structures to protect ourselves, laws, beliefs, routines. We crave predictability, even when it suffocates us. When chaos enters our lives, we resist it, we fight it, we call it crisis. Yet deep down, we know that without change, nothing new can grow. Without storms, there can be no renewal. So the paradox of order and chaos teaches us to trust both. To see the destruction of one order not as the end, but as the preparation for the next. To see the unknown not as a threat, but as the raw material of creation. If you look closely at a fractal pattern, you see chaos and order coexisting perfectly. Infinite unpredictability with imperfect repetition. The same pattern repeats endlessly, each layer unique yet identical to the whole. Life works like that. A fractal of birth and dissolution, chaos and structure, repeating across all scales. You too are a fractal of this cosmic balance. Within you lives the need for control and the longing for freedom. The desire to build and the impulse to destroy. The harmony and the storm. To deny either is to live half a life. When chaos comes, let it. Let it unmake the structures that no longer serve you. Let it scatter the pieces that were never truly yours, because only when order dissolves can the deeper pattern reveal itself. And when order returns, embrace it with gratitude, but never cling to it. For order too will one day fade, and its dissolution will open another door. The paradox of order and chaos shouldn't exist. The universe should be one or the other, stable or wild, predictable or random. But existence needs both. They are the inhale and exhale of creation, the heartbeat of the cosmos. So when your life falls apart, remember, you are not lost in chaos. You are being rearranged by it. The pattern is still there, invisible, waiting to take shape. The universe is sculpting you with both hands, one of order, one of chaos. into something greater than either alone. The paradox of time's arrow. Time seems simple. One moment follows another. The past flows into the present slides into the future, and nothing ever reverses. We live at the edge of this current, carried endlessly forward by the invisible river called time. Yet when science and philosophy examine this river closely, its current begins to blur. Because according to the deepest laws of physics, time doesn't actually flow at all. The paradox of time's arrow lies in this. Everything moves forward, and yet nothing truly moves. From your experience, the arrow of time feels absolute. Milk spills, but never unspills. You grow older, but never younger. Memories form in one direction and fade in another. The past seems fixed, the future open. But the equations that describe the universe don't agree. The fundamental laws of nature, gravity, electromagnetism, even quantum mechanics, work just as well backward as forward. Nothing in those laws says that time must have a preferred direction. So where does the arrow come from? Physicists point to entropy, the tendency of systems to move from order to disorder. A cup shatters but doesn't reassemble because there are far more disordered states than ordered ones. Entropy increases, and with it, time's arrow seems to emerge. But entropy doesn't tell us why we experience time as flowing. It only describes the imbalance that gives it direction. Here's the paradox. The arrow of time is not built into the laws of physics. It arises from the conditions of the universe itself. It's a property of perspective, not of absolute reality. If the universe began in an improbably ordered state, then time's direction is simply the direction in which disorder increases. But if you could stand outside time, you'd see no flow at all, just an eternal pattern, complete and unmoving. This idea feels impossible because the mind is trapped inside time. You cannot step out of it to see the full picture. You experience existence as motion through moments, but that motion may be illusion. Every moment might already exist as part of a static structure, a cosmic film reel with every frame eternally present. The past, the present, the future, all coexisting side by side, unmoving. If that is true, then the arrow of time is simply consciousness moving across the frames, like a flashlight scanning across a frozen landscape. The moments don't pass, you do. Awareness gives time its direction by experiencing one slice after another. But then, if all moments already exist, where is change? What does before or after even mean? Are we living through the illusion of flow in a universe that never truly changes? This is where the paradox deepens. If time doesn't flow, then cause and effect lose meaning. Every event, from the birth of a star to the movement of your hand, already exists in the tapestry of space-time. You're not changing the future. You're merely discovering the part of the pattern where your next experience resides. And yet, from within that pattern, the feeling of passage is inescapable. You remember the past, but not the future. You can influence what hasn't happened, but not what has. Even if time is a dimension like space, consciousness experiences it differently. It seems to move only one way. Some physicists argue that consciousness itself creates the illusion of time's flow, that awareness experiences itself sequentially because it cannot hold infinity all at once. To know the eternal, it must unfold it piece by piece. The arrow of time in this view is not cosmic, it's psychological. But if time is an illusion, why do we age? Why do stars die? Why does decay exist? Why do irreversible processes mark every corner of reality? Perhaps time's arrow is real at our scale, but dissolves at the cosmic level. Like ripples on a pond, motion exists locally, even though the water beneath is still. This duality, the eternal and the fleeting, is what makes time so haunting. At the deepest level, everything may be frozen in perfection. Yet within that perfection, we live out the illusion of change, feeling loss and growth, beginnings and endings, the timeless dreams of time. You can feel this paradox in moments of stillness, when you're completely present, watching the sea, listening to rain. The sense of time fades. There is only now, endless and complete. The past and future dissolve, and yet you don't vanish. Awareness remains, timeless. Then, when you return to thought, the arrow resumes, and the dream of movement continues. Perhaps that's what eternity truly is. Not an infinite stretch of time, but the absence of it. The eternal is not endless duration, it is timeless presence. But time's arrow still gives life meaning. Without direction, there could be no growth, no story, no transformation. You would not be able to become who you are. The arrow carries experience forward, even if the river beneath never moves. And still, the paradox lingers. If all moments already exist, then every choice you make is both free and predetermined. Every path already lies within the map. You are exploring a destiny that was written before time began, but from inside, it feels like creation. The arrow moves because you do. So perhaps time's arrow is not something to be escaped or disproved, but to be understood as a sacred illusion. It allows consciousness to dance within eternity, to experience the infinite as a sequence, the whole as a story. When you look at a spiral galaxy, you see the symbol of time's paradox. The spiral moves outward endlessly, yet it circles the same center. The galaxy spins forever, and still it remains itself. Motion and stillness, change and permanence, time and eternity, all coexist in that celestial shape. The paradox of time's arrow shouldn't exist. Time should move forward absolutely, or not at all. But it does both. The universe is timeless, yet within its stillness flows the endless story of becoming. And you, standing here, are that story. You are time's arrow in human form. Eternity pretending to move forward, one heartbeat at a time. The paradox of meaning. Every human life is driven by the search for meaning. It is what gives shape to our days and depth to our nights. We chase it through love, work, creation, and belief. We suffer when we lose it, and we rise when we rediscover it. Yet beneath this endless pursuit lies a profound contradiction. The universe appears to have no inherent meaning at all. The paradox of meaning begins here. Humans need purpose to live, but existence itself offers none. Look up at the night sky. The stars do not care who you are. Galaxies spin without intention. Life forms and fades in an indifferent cosmos. To the laws of physics, your hopes and fears are invisible, and yet you feel them so deeply that they shape the course of your entire life. You find meaning in the sound of rain, in a touch, in the face of someone you love. Meaning is what makes existence bearable and beautiful. But if meaning is not found in the universe, it must be created by the mind. That realization both frees and frightens us. It frees us because it means we can choose meaning. We can craft our own purpose. It frightens us because it means there is no ultimate guarantee. Meaning becomes fragile, subjective, and endlessly shifting. Still, even in its fragility, it feels real. Because meaning is not a property of the universe. It is the language consciousness uses to interpret it. Just as the eye creates color from light, the mind creates meaning from experience. Without it, life would be a series of unconnected events, random noise without music. But here is where the paradox deepens. Meaning is created by beings who know it is temporary. Everything you build, every purpose you pursue, will one day end. Empires collapse, memories fade, stars die. Even the universe itself may dissolve into cold emptiness. How can meaning survive in the face of that inevitability? And yet, it does. Humans continue to love, create, and hope, even knowing that nothing lasts. This persistence defies logic. It is as if meaning exists not because of permanence, but in spite of impermanence. Perhaps meaning is not found in what endures, but in what matters now. Meaning, then, might be less about truth and more about connection. When you act with love, when you create beauty, when you comfort someone who suffers, You touch something beyond time. The gesture may fade, but its resonance remains. Meaning arises in the relationship between moments, not in the moments themselves. Think of a song. Each note by itself is meaningless, but when the notes come together in rhythm and harmony, they form music. Meaning is that harmony, the invisible pattern that makes the parts whole. But if meaning is subjective, does that mean anything can mean anything? Are all purposes equal? Can one person's meaning be another's madness? Here the paradox twists again. If meaning is created, it seems arbitrary. Yet we instinctively know that some meanings feel deeper, truer, more universal. Love feels more meaningful than cruelty. Creation feels more profound than destruction. The question is, why? Perhaps certain meanings align more closely with the underlying rhythm of existence. Love, compassion, and creation mirror the universe's tendency toward connection and complexity. Hatred and isolation move against that flow, pulling toward fragmentation and entropy. In this sense, meaning is not arbitrary. It is resonance. The more your purpose aligns with the deeper order of existence, the more truthful it feels. But what if the paradox goes further? What if meaninglessness itself has meaning? The realization that nothing has inherent purpose can awaken a strange freedom. If life has no pre-written script, you are free to write your own. The void becomes a canvas. From the silence of meaninglessness, you can paint your deepest truth. This is why despair and awakening often live side by side. When people lose their old meanings, religion, status, success, they often fall into darkness, but if they keep going, they sometimes find a new kind of peace, the acceptance that meaning is not something to be found, but something to be lived. Life itself, in all its fleeting beauty, becomes enough. The existentialists understood this well. They said the absurd, the clash between our hunger for meaning and the universe's indifference, is not a curse, but an invitation. It forces us to create, to affirm life not because it has meaning, but because we give it meaning. Even the simple act of noticing beauty is a rebellion against the void. When you watch the sunset, you know it has no purpose. It doesn't exist for you, and yet it moves you. It makes you feel that life, even without reason, is worth living. The meaning lies not in the sunset itself, but in the awareness that perceives it. Perhaps meaning is not something you find in life, but something life finds in you. Consciousness gives the universe a way to witness its own wonder. Through your eyes, reality becomes aware that it exists, and in that awareness, meaning is born. The paradox of meaning shouldn't exist. There should be either a universe full of inherent purpose, or one utterly empty of it. But what we find is both. A cosmos without meaning that gives rise to beings who cannot live without it. Maybe that contradiction is the very point. Maybe existence creates consciousness precisely to fill its own emptiness. The universe dreams through us to remind itself that even in the absence of purpose, there can still be love, beauty, and awe. And so, we continue, seeking, questioning, creating meaning where none was given. That act alone is sacred. It is what turns chaos into story, matter into life, and time into memory. In the end, meaning is not something you chase. It is something you notice. It lives in the small and the infinite alike, in the laughter between friends, in the silence after loss, in the steady hum of being itself. The paradox of meaning is that it both exists and doesn't. Life is meaningless, and yet it means everything.